capitalism, and it incorporates the benefits of a state that will provide for those who are unfortunate and who would otherwise be a threat to themselves and society if they live in extreme poverty. We do not need to have in this world extreme poverty. And if you look at these charts that I'm about to show you, I'm going to show you what the difference between the different systems are. Here you will see, for example, in this first thing, I'm just showing you an overall overview of what different political systems can look like in terms of pyramid structure. I use the pyramid structure for a very simple reason. All social structures, all social systems, all political systems can be formed in the form of a pyramid in terms of who's at the top and who's at the bottom. No system is perfect, not even social democracy. But there is no better option than social democracy, as you will begin to see as I show you these graphics. In the first graphic, we see what unethical extreme capitalism looks like. Here we see, and on the side of the pyramid, you'll see another graphic that shows in a bar, it shows the level of freedom. The sort of reddish color means people who are literally slaves. The yellow are people who are somewhat free, and the green are the people who are free. Now, in a capitalist system, you have a small group of very, very wealthy people at the top, and they obviously are free. And you also have an upper wealthy class, sort of not the wealthiest people, but just below that, who are also free, and you have an upper middle class who are somewhat free, or I should say free. And then you have a lower middle class who are not entirely free. And in the capitalist system, you have a working poor and a starving masses. And if you look at that first graphic, you'll see that you can see it very clearly, that in a capitalist society, most of the people are either constantly in strife, in poverty, in extreme poverty, and pretty much starving. And I'm talking about starving not as in like always necessarily being always hungry and like shriveled up, but I'm talking about not eating the right foods, being unhealthy because you can't afford decent nutrition. So in an extreme capitalist system, you have a lot of people in extreme poverty, and you have a lot of people who are in the lower in the working poor class. That is, people who have to work and whose lives are otherwise meaningless, and they're not free. Now you look at the next one next to it, and you look at communism and fascism, which are pretty much the same in terms of their pyramid structure. A very smaller elite are at the top compared to capitalism, a smaller elite, but and there's a small lower middle class right underneath the elite. There is no upper middle class, there's no upper wealthy class in a fascist or communist, so-called communist system. These are anti-democratic systems, by the way. There's no freedom. The capitalist system also is anti-democratic and unstable, and the communist system and the fascist systems are also anti-democratic and unstable. As you can see, most of the people are working poor or starving. Though there are less people in absolute, poverty and starving than you would find in capitalism, in a communist state, there are a lot more people who are just working to survive and have a meaningless life as slaves. And they don't live very long either. Okay, and then you look at these other two systems. Here is my favorite, social democracy, ethical moderate capitalism, democratic and stable, compared to socialism, which is semi-democratic, and unfortunately, because I said it slips in, socialist systems eventually either head towards becoming communist, and then they fail dismally, and they end up becoming taken over by a extreme capitalist or by fascist or communist. The communists, like I said, don't succeed, so it doesn't work. So socialism, you can see, has, and by the way, in social democracy, you have a significant, you have a very small number of very, very wealthy people, but you have a significant number of upper class wealthy and upper middle class people. Pretty much more than half the society is upper class and upper middle class, and the lower middle class and only there's working poor. There's a very small number of working poor. There are no people who are in absolute poverty and starving. In socialism, you have an upper class and an upper middle class and an elite, and they make up a smaller percentage, much smaller than the social democracy. And then you have a lot of people who are lower middle class, and an even larger number of people who are working poor, and you have also some degree of extreme poverty. Now, you see, if you can compare all these systems, I'm going to show them one by one again, and you can take a look for yourself and understand. And then I'm going to show them all together. And you can see very clearly that of all these four, or I put them in four categories, but there's really here, there's unethical extreme capitalism, there's so-called communism, there's fascism, there's social democracy, or in other words, ethical moderate capitalism, and then there's socialism. So that makes 5 systems that you can compare. And these are the only possible socioeconomic political systems that you can have. There's no other. Anarchy, by the way, just is not a system. And it can't work, because why would you want to live in a world that was without any government and without any security at all? I mean, so it's going to be the survival of the fittest, so-called fittest, by the way, because you know what makes us fit as human beings? It's not the brawn you have, it's not the physical muscle and your physical health. It's your ability to cooperate and compromise as a species. As a species, we are higher primates, we are mammals, and we benefit from cooperation and compromise and diversity and tolerance, rather than from intolerance and lack of unity and diversity and hating each other and all that. Extreme competition destroys us, so we need to cooperate and compromise a lot more than we do. What I'm saying about this is that in an extreme capitalist system, everybody's out to compete, and the government supports that, even at the expense of society as a whole and at the environments. And it's not good for anybody. It's not even good for the capitalist. In an anarchistic situation, obviously, a group of thugs will take over most of the resources, and other people will just be, brutalized and murdered or enslaved. That means that anarchy cannot work. You can't trust other human beings unless they're wise enough. In that case, they wouldn't be anarchists. Social democracy, it's the best of all of these systems. It's imperfect, of course, because it depends upon making sure that it is a real social democracy, that it's really working. Now, today there are certain governments in Europe and certain societies in Europe that are social democratic to a degree. But they don't live up to their own promise, because they could be much better and more effective and more real as social democracies. They are short of being real social democracies, but they're closer to it than other governments and countries in the world. For example, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Holland, to some extent the UK, and to a minor extent France and Germany. These are relatively social democratic socioeconomic political systems. No matter who's in power, they are, for the most part, somewhat social democratic. Now, we need more of that than less of that. But of course, social democracy, like any good system, requires constant maintenance, a lot of effort, and proper governance, which is the responsibility of the public, of the citizens. And to create the right kind of people who will watch the watchers, and they themselves will be watched. To have a healthy democracy, by the way, you need, that means to have a social democracy, because that's the only form of democracy that's healthy, is a social democracy. To have a healthy democracy or social democracy, you have to have somebody watching the watchers, overseeing the police and the military, who are themselves members of the public. And then you have to have another group of people watching them. So everybody has to be watching everybody. So at least in public areas, not in private areas. In public areas of life, you have to have a lot of watching going on, because you want to make sure that nobody is going to abuse the system and hurt other people. And that can work.